I'm Ryan Emmanuel. So I am the son of Lanny and Pam Emmanuel. I'm the grandson of Martha Demriotum from the Sandy Plains community, Vernis Emmanuel Hughes, and Jesse Oxendine, Pembroke and Saddletree communities. So that's how I introduce myself in the Lumbee way. I'm a member of the Lumbee tribe. It's a very large Indian nation in the intercoastal plain of North Carolina. I have to enunciate very precisely and say Lumbee and not Lumbee. So our panel today is made up of members of an Indigenous water knowledge network that has formed over the past couple of years. And so we're organized as a group, and I want to give a little introduction and some context, and then allow my friends and colleagues to speak. A little more about who I am and what I do. So Lumbee people, we take our name from the Lumbee River. That's the place where we gathered in our traditional territories. That's the last part of our traditional territories during colonial expansion. It was a refuge for us, and we take our name from that river. We don't have mountains or cliffs or the type of dramatic, rugged scenery that you have out here. We have our river, and we have its lovely swamps and wetlands that accompany it. We also have very old trees. Some of the oldest trees in North America are located not too far away from us. There was a big news piece recently about a newly discovered 3,000-year-old tree in our tribal territory. It's a bald cypress, but these are our relatives, and these trees are important to us. They're important to us culturally. I talk a little bit about Lumbee people and our relationship to water in a paper that was published earlier this year in the journal Environmental History. So if you want to look at that journal, you can find out some more about Lumbee people and their relationship with water. I'm a hydrologist at North Carolina State University. It's the largest university in North Carolina. I'm a hydrologist because there's a pressing need to address water challenges related to quantity and quality, not just in indigenous communities, but everywhere. It's a universally important substance for all life, human and non-human alike. My university is 2 hours away from 6 of North Carolina's 8 native nations: Lumbee, Hawasaponi, Kahari, Wakamal-Siouan, Saponi, and the Occaneechi Band of Saponi. It's about 100,000 native people live within about 2 hours of my campus, yet we have a very small native population on campus itself, maybe 100 to 120 self-identifying students. So to come here and to see thriving tribal college and students succeeding and building community is really inspiring to me. So I want to thank you all for allowing me to come here and be in this environment with you today. You know, the history of my field, hydrology, draws from engineering and geosciences, and it has a very firm rooting in the Western Academy. And so, as a scholar, I'm infected with that colonialism. And so, my academic upbringing comes through those types of channels. So it's been a journey for me to try and take the work that I was trained to do and to reshape it and reform it in a way that's actually meaningful to the community to which I belong and the communities with which I work. And our field of hydrology is just starting to acknowledge how holistic water is and the study of water is. And it's funny that we've only begun to do this academically in the past 20 years or so, you know, when our people have known this for thousands of years, and we still practice the holism of water, and we understand the interconnectedness of living and non-living parts of our environment. So with very few exceptions, the field of hydrology is still very far behind when it comes to acknowledging that holism. But I hope that some of those exceptions you'll learn more about today. So that's what our session is about, some of these exceptions. My friends and colleagues, Shandine, Ronalda, and Todd are going to share some of their work and reflections on Indigenous water knowledge, and we're part of this growing network. I'll end by telling you a little bit about how this network started. In 2015, Dr. Carletta Chief from the University of Arizona and I first met at ACES. That was a national conference in Phoenix. And we connected and said, hey, I thought I was the only native hydrologist in a large research university. And she said, I thought the same thing. And so we instantly shared this in common. We said, if we're not the only ones, there must be others as well. And how do we find and connect with those people? And it really happened through sharing our networks and also thinking more broadly about who is a water scholar, water scientist, who is a water knowledge keeper, thinking even more broadly. Because as a group, if we limit ourselves to these narrowly defined definitions that come from our academic pedigrees, we're really excluding a lot of people who have a lot to contribute. And in 2015, at the time that Carletta and I met, the Gold King mine disaster had just happened. And so if any of you know Dr. Chief, she's been heavily involved in working with the Navajo Nation in their multi-year efforts to understand the impacts of that disaster on their community. And at the same time, I had recently begun to engage with North Carolina tribes on issues related to water. One of our nearby tribes, the Coharie, have been working on restoring their namesake river, the Great Coharie River, for culture purposes, and also to foster potential ecotourism as a means of economic development in their community. My own tribe, the Lumbee, had been pursuing cultural revitalization efforts that involved traditional plants and other materials that came from our river and our wetlands. But both of these tribes were concerned about water quality degradation in North Carolina due to factory farming. And you have to understand, if you're from the West, we have this legal framework here of water rights that informs a lot of the activities that we pursue related to law and policy around water. But in the East is not like that. We do not have a water rights framework. Yet tribes in the East are still very much concerned about water, because regardless of the settler, colonial, legal, and policy framework, we still respect and we understand our waterways as givers of life and also takers of life. But we have that mutual respect for our waterways, and we still struggle to identify ourselves and to reclaim aspects of our sovereignty by taking care of this relative, our rivers, our wetlands, our swamps, and things like this. So both Carletta and I shared concerns about elevating Indigenous voices in these spaces where we were functioning as hydrologists. We also wanted to figure out how other scholars and knowledge keepers were performing these activities in their communities. And so we gathered other scientists, community members, scholars, elders, and allies together. So this was a really unique group of people that we brought together to Salish Kootenai College in Montana last August. And we spent 3 days together with funding from National Science Foundation. We were able to bring 36 people together for this 3-day conference. And it was sort of the academic equivalent of an intergenerational gathering. So across the academic spectrum, we had faculty at different levels. We had graduate students. We had tribal college faculty and students. We had practitioners who are working for tribal governments or working for other communities. We had advocates and activists. And we were rooted by contributions from our resident elders. So some of you may know Vernon Masayespa, the Hopi elder, came and shared some water knowledge with us and talked about the emergence of Hopi people into this world, and really helped to center us and link us back to things that are really important about water. Ms. Donna Chavis came from the Lumbee tribe and also helped to root us and to ground us in the thinkings of our elders and our ancestors. And so that was a very unique aspect of this particular gathering. We also saw some practices in action. So the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes gave us a tour of their water management infrastructure. We were able to see how they are working with the water resources in their nation and addressing some of these issues on their own. One of the things that came up in our sharing and presenting and panels during this workshop, there were sort of two dichotomous examples. One was the example like the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, where you have indigenous-led efforts, whether it be research or whether it be management, just very centered and strongly rooted indigenous efforts. But the other example was a lack of indigenous voices and perspectives in research and decision making. And so we saw this divergent path in the types of case studies and issues that we work on as scholars. And so that's something that we're still grappling with, and we're trying to figure out how this network can step into that space and how we can sort of bridge this divide between the worlds that we occupy. Many of us live and work in the Western Academy, but we also have very strong connections either to our own indigenous communities or to other indigenous communities with whom we have made a commitment to partner. So I'll wrap up by asking where are we going with this? So what's the purpose of our network now, and what have we done so far? Dr. Chief guest edited a special issue of an academic journal, and the majority of the papers in that issue were led by indigenous authors, which was that was a real breaking into that space, that Western academic space. And although we are playing by their rules and publishing in a journal by all of those rules, we're still doing it in a way that brings indigenous voices into that space. We've reconvened a couple of times to talk about how to sustain this network and carry it forward. One thing that we're doing now is we're working with our one of the larger science professional societies, the American Geophysical Union, to bring land acknowledgement to the next annual meeting in December, which typically has between 20,000 and 25,000 attendees. So it's a really big deal, and I know that there's a risk of land acknowledgements being rote exercises, but if done appropriately, it can also be a strong teaching exercise. So as you hear from my friends, I hope you'll hear examples of indigenous-led and framed thought and practice, and you'll get some glimpses into the future of I guess what we could have if we have the patience to sit humbly with our communities and elders and knowledge holders. And with that, I would like to let you hear from my colleagues. Thank you.